The void of the world of void abruptly shattered, not from a titanic clash of fists, nor from a blinding surge of ki, but from a terrifying, absolute silence. Son Goku, the mortal who had shaken the very pillars of the heavens, dissolved in the glittering, soundless ash. Above the drifting remnants of the universe's greatest defender, the Grand Zeno hovered. He was no longer a child of innocent whimsy. His round, blank eyes had hardened into voids of mechanical malice, revealing the true hollow face of the Creator, a sovereign of absolute, apathetic erasure who viewed life as nothing more than a fleeting, annoying variable. There was no grand explosion, no triumphant roar, only the cold hum of divine authority closing the book on a mortal life. And then, from the kneeling, trembling form of Vegeta, came a sound that did not belong in the realms of the living or the divine. It was a guttural, cosmic tearing, the sound of a soul snapping its chains. The Prince of all Saiyans watched his eternal rival fade into nothingness, not with sorrow, but with a black, suffocating rage that immediately began to dye the blinding white expanse in the colors of abyssal slaughter. Before the heavens are painted in the blood of deities, bear witness to this fractured timeline. Stay with us, lest the true price of divine hubris be forgotten in the ashes of the multiverse. The ash of Son Goku did not fall. In the absolute vacuum of the world of void, where time and direction hold no dominion, the fading golden particles of the multiverse's greatest mortal lingered in the heavy air like suspended starlight. Vegeta remained perfectly still, his eyes locked onto the empty space where Kakarot had stood just a fraction of a heartbeat ago. There was no body to catch, no final exchange of rivalrous banter, no defiant, bloody smirk to signal a miraculous return. There was only a sickening, absolute emptiness that seemed to swallow the ambient light of the arena. High above the shattered bedrock, seated upon their floating celestial thrones, the twin Zenos lowered their small, glowing hands. The childlike innocence that had so long masked the Omni King's terrifying nature had evaporated. Their round, blank eyes were now pools of mechanical, chilling apathy. They did not blink. They did not cheer. He was getting too loud. The Creator spoke in terrifying unison, their voices overlapping in a dissonant, echoing frequency that carried no warmth, no anger, and no soul. It was the clinical tone of a gardener plucking a weed from a vast, indifferent garden. Vegeta's chest refused to draw breath. The silence that gripped the tournament stage was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical, crushing weight. On the distant grandstands, Beerus, the god of destruction for Universe 7, sat frozen, his feline ears flattened against his skull in an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Beside him, the ever-present, serene smile of Whis had completely vanished, replaced by a grim, rigid line of tension. The divine hierarchy understood the cosmic law unfolding before them. A mortal had brushed too close to the sun, and the Creator had simply corrected the anomaly. But to the Saiyan prince kneeling in the dust, the entire axis of the universe had just violently snapped. Kakarot was a fool. He was a reckless, maddening idiot who risked the fate of galaxies simply to satisfy the primal itch of his Saiyan blood. But he was also the eternal fire that illuminated the dark, the insurmountable mountain Vegeta had sworn his very existence to climb. Without Kakarot, there was no peak to conquer. There was only an infinite, suffocating abyss. Looking up toward the hollow, floating deities who held the strings of reality, the grand, sickening lie of the cosmos crystallized in Vegeta's mind. The gods did not curate life, nor did they protect it. They merely tolerated mortality until it grew inconvenient. A tremor began to pulse through the null realm. It did not originate from the shifting plates of the arena, but from a tear in the metaphysical fabric of the dimension itself. It started as a low guttural vibration within Vegeta's chest, a sound so dense and heavy, it caused the floating remnants of Goku's ash to tremble and dissolve into nothingness. The blazing divine blue aura of his Super Saiyan God Ki flickered wildly, violently rejecting the tranquil control required to sustain it before dying out completely. He dropped his gaze to his hands, his knuckles white as his fingers dug into the indestructible kachi steel, fracturing it into spider webs of glowing fissures. This was not the explosive, blinding rage of his past awakenings. It was a total, catastrophic implosion of the soul. The Hakai energy, the volatile power of destruction he had so recently coaxed from his own stubborn, unyielding will, ignited deep within his core. But as it bled through his skin, it had mutated. It was no longer the vibrant royal purple wielded by Lord Beerus. As Vegeta slowly rose to his feet, his eyes burned away into blank, luminous voids of silver and white. The aura that violently erupted around him was the color of dried blood and eclipsed stars. A swirling, suffocating miasma of gravitational malice. It was a power so fundamentally wrong, so alien to the established laws of the heavens, that the Grand Priest himself stepped forward from the shadows of the throne, his perpetually calm brow furrowing in genuine, unprecedented alarm. The Prince of all Saiyans was dead, burned away in the cold crucible of absolute loss. What stood up from the dust was a living cataclysm, radiating a silent promise to drag the heavens down into the dirt and force the gods to choke on their own divine apathy. The celestial firmament of the world of void had never known gravity, yet the very dimension began to sag beneath the crushing density of Vegeta's silence. The crimson and black miasma did not merely surround him. It consumed the space he occupied, eating the light, the air, and the lingering echoes of the erased universe. It was a localized apocalypse. Down in the spectator stance, the lesser deities, the Kaioshins and the remaining gods of destruction, clutched the crumbling railings of their platforms as the metaphysical pressure threatened to crush their immortal lungs. "This is impossible," Beerus whispered, his voice trembling in a way it had not done in millions of years. He leaned forward, his claws digging deep, desperate gouges into the divine stone. "That is Hakai. But it has no discipline. It has no reverence. It is purely cannibalistic." Whis did not answer. The angel's unblinking gaze was fixed upon the Saiyan, his mind racing through infinite calculations and temporal possibilities, finding nothing but dead ends. A mortal soul was never meant to harbor the unalloyed concept of destruction, without the insulating buffer of divine training and absolute emotional detachment. To do so was to invite immediate self-erasure. Yet Vegeta was not erasing himself. He was feeding the god of destruction's power with a bottomless, agonizing grief, fundamentally altering its nature. It was no longer a force of natural, universal balance. It had been twisted into an engine of absolute, judgmental vengeance. The eternal rival, the infuriating clown, the only other pure-blooded survivor of a doomed world. All of it, gone, casually swiped away by a bored child. High above the suffocating panic of the lower gods, the Grand Priest raised a single, pristine hand. A barrier of absolute luminous order expanded outward from the Zenus's floating throne. A translucent dome of angelic light designed to separate the absolute purity of the Omni Kings from the sudden, chaotic filth of mortal rebellion. "Prince of the Saiyans," the Grand Priest's voice chimed, a melodic, omnipresent hum that carried the paralyzing weight of universal law. "Your grief is a recognized temporary variable. Your actions, however, are now in direct violation of the Creator's decree. Extinguish your ki, stand down, and accept the silence." The melodic command washed over the ruined arena, a soothing, divine frequency meant to compel submission at a cellular level. It struck the violent crimson storm swirling around Vegeta and violently shattered, fragmenting like glass against iron. Vegeta slowly lifted his head. The blank, luminous silver of his eyes pierced the spatial distortion, locking directly onto the Grand Priest. There was no royal arrogance remaining in his posture. No desperate, burning need to prove himself the strongest warrior. Those mortal desires had burned to ash alongside Kakarot. What remained was the cold, terrifying clarity of an executioner who had just realized the judge was corrupt. He opened his mouth to speak, and the voice that echoed across the infinite void was a jagged harmony of his own raspy growl and the collective, phantom roar of a murdered race. "The Creator's decree," Vegeta rasped, the syllables bleeding dark, volatile energy, "is flawed." He took a single step forward. The indestructible Kachi steel beneath his boot did not crack or yield. It simply ceased to exist, erased into nothingness by the passive, monstrous gravity of his new form. The distance between the tournament stage and the untouchable throne of the Omni Kings was meant to be an infinite, uncrossable chasm, protected by absolute dimensions of compressed space and time. Vegeta did not fly. He reached out a heavily muscled, gauntleted hand, his fingers curling into tense claws, and physically seized the invisible fabric of the void itself. With a guttural snarl that tore his own throat and echoed with the finality of a dying star, he pulled. The universe screamed. The absolute distance between the mortal plane and the divine throne was a mathematical certainty, an infallible law woven into the architecture of the multiverse. Yet as Vegeta's hand closed into a fist, that infallible law warped, groaned, and violently collapsed inward. The visual effect was horrifying. The empty expanse of the Null Realm folded like crushed paper, dragging the floating pavilion of the Omni Kings downward in a dizzying, sickening lurch. Space itself tore, leaving jagged, bleeding fissures of pure nothingness in the wake of the Saiyans' impossible strength. Whis, usually the anchor of unbothered serenity, gripped his staff with both hands, the gem at its apex flashing violently as he tried to stabilize the localized timeline. Next to him, Vados, Makarita, and the rest of the angelic siblings mirrored his alarm, their flawless features marred by a sudden, jarring exposure to mortal chaos. The untouchable observers were suddenly standing in the direct path of an avalanche. "He is collapsing the dimensional strata," we stated, his voice stripped of its usual melodic lilt, leaving only the cold, sharp edge of disbelief. His ki is no longer radiating outward. It is a singularity. He is consuming the world of void to fuel his own existence. Vegeta did not hear the frantic whispers of the divine. He was deafened by the roar of his own heart, a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated hatred. Every step he took upward through the shattered air was a rejection of the god's authority. The crimson aura surrounding him thickened, coalescing into jagged physical constructs of dark energy that crackled with the agonizing echoes of erased universes. He was no longer just the Prince of Universe 7. He had become the vengeful ghost of every mortal soul ever discarded by the childish whims of the Omni Kings. As the distance closed, the twin Zenos leaned forward, their blank, doll-like faces tilting in mirrored confusion. For the first time since the dawn of creation, they did not understand what they were looking at. This anomaly could not be erased because the anomaly had seemingly erased its own conceptual boundaries. The Grand Priest's eyes narrowed, the gentle smile finally vanishing from his androgynous face. The apex of the angelic hierarchy stepped in front of his masters, his halo blazing with an intense, blinding white light that sought to sterilize the approaching darkness. He extended a single, open palm toward the ascending Saiyan. "You have broken the wheel of creation, mortal," the Grand Priest decreed, his voice echoing with the force of a collapsing galaxy. "Let your soul be unwritten." A beam of pure absolute erasure, a light so bright it cast no shadows, erupted from the Grand Priest's hand. A divine execution aimed directly at Vegeta's heart. It was a power that had felled ancient gods and reshaped realities. But as the blinding pillar of angelic judgment struck the Prince of all Saiyans, it did not incinerate him. Instead, it struck the churning crimson maelstrom of his aura and violently fractured, splitting into harmless, scattering rays of dying light. Vegeta emerged from the blinding glare, his armor cracked, his muscles bulging with unnatural demonic pressure. His luminous silver eyes locked onto the Grand Priest with an intensity that made the immortal being instinctively step backward. "Unwrite me then," Vegeta whispered, the sound cutting through the roar of the crumbling void like a serrated blade. He raised a hand dripping with the dark, heavy gravity of his corrupted Hakai. "If you can." The hesitation of the Grand Priest lasted only a fraction of a microsecond, a measurement of time entirely irrelevant to mortals, but an eternity of absolute failure for the apex of the angelic order. In that infinitesimal pause, the hierarchy of the cosmos shattered. The Grand Priest moved, abandoning the sterile, detached erasure of his magic for the flawless, martial perfection of autonomous ultra instinct. He did not cross the space between them. He simply existed at the point of impact, his glowing fist driving directly toward the center of Vegeta's chest with enough kinetic force to shatter a dozen galaxies. It was a strike devoid of malice, governed only by the cold mathematical necessity of eliminating an error in the cosmic code. The blow connected. The sound was a deafening, hollow crack that sent shockwaves of blinding white kinetic energy rippling through the dark dimension, pulverizing the remaining floating debris of the tournament stage into subatomic dust. Down below, Beerus and Whis braced against the violent tempest, shielding their eyes from the brilliant flash of angelic retaliation. It was a perfect strike. It should have cleanly separated the mortal soul from his physical vessel. But as the blinding light faded, the chilling reality of the new epic was revealed. The Grand Priest's fist was buried deep into the hardened armor of Vegeta's chest. The Kachi plating caved inward from the apocalyptic force. Yet Vegeta had not been moved a single inch. He did not flinch. He did not cough blood. The absolute, flawless momentum of the angelic strike had been swallowed whole by the abyssal, crimson gravity of the demon god's aura. The pain, the agonizing body-breaking trauma of the blow, did not weaken the Saiyan prince. It fed him. The dark flames surrounding him surged higher, roaring with a terrifying, ecstatic hunger. This was the dark evolution of his ultra ego, entirely divorced from the necessity of survival, weaponized purely for destruction. Is that it? Vegeta's voice was a tectonic grind, vibrating through the very marrow of the divine beings present. Is that the absolute limit of your hollow perfection? Before the Grand Priest could withdraw, before the flawless evasion of his ultra instinct could carry him to safety, Vegeta moved. It was not the elegant, thoughtless dodge of an angel, but a brutal, snapping motion born of raw, unadulterated instinct and suffocating rage. His heavy gauntlet clamped down upon the pristine wrist of the Grand Priest. The terrifying crack of fracturing bone echoed through the sudden, horrified silence of the Null Realm. A collective gasp of sheer, unprecedented terror swept through the surviving gods of destruction. The angels, entities who had existed in unblemished serenity since the dawn of time, surged forward in a panic, their halos flaring in desperate unison. Whis, Vados, Makarita, and the others abandoned their spectator platforms, darting across the abyss as streaks of multicolored light to defend their progenitor. They were entirely too late. With a feral roar that carried the collective agony of the erased Universe 7, Vegeta swung his free arm. The strike was completely devoid of grace, a wide, sweeping backhand charged with the concentrated, corrosive darkness of his corrupted Hakai. It tore through the advancing angelic vanguard like a scythe through dry wheat. The invincible barrier of their natural ultra instinct, which relied on the logical flow of ki and intention, could not compute the sheer, illogical malice of the attack. The crimson wave slammed into the closest angels. A sickening, wet tear ripped through the blinding white void. There was no graceful deflection, no miraculous evasion. The celestial bodies of the divine siblings were violently thrown backward, their perfect, unsoiled garments torn and burned by the corrosive dark energy. And then, gravity asserted a new, horrific truth upon the world of void. Silver blood, luminous, ethereal, and utterly impossible, spilled from the shattered heavens. It rained down upon the cracked floor of the arena, hissing as it touched the cold, dead stone. The immortal, untouchable guardians of the multiverse had been made to bleed. Vegeta stood at the epicenter of the desecration, his grip still crushing the wrist of the paralyzed Grand Priest, his silver eyes burning through the descending shower of angelic ichor. The age of the gods was over. The era of the demon had begun. The silver droplets sizzled against the cold bedrock of the Null Realm, a sound so quiet, yet so deafening, it seemed to drown out the swirling chaos of the multiverse. The Grand Priest stared down at his trapped, mangled arm. For the first time in an eternity stretching back to the original breath of creation, the progenitor of the angels experienced the vulgar, mortal sensation of physical limitation. The pristine bones in his wrist were ground to absolute powder beneath the Saiyan's gauntlet. Pain, an abstract, primitive concept he had only ever observed in lesser beings, flared through his perfect, divine nervous system like a corrosive poison. Vegeta did not release his grip. The dark, gravitational aura of his corrupted ultra ego flared, bleeding outward like a heavy ink spill in a pristine ocean. He pulled the Grand Priest closer, the sheer, crushing density of his ki distorting the angelic light that desperately tried, and failed, to repair the immortal's flesh. "You look upon us from your pedestals and call us mortal," Vegeta whispered, his voice resonating with the grinding tectonic plates of dying planets. "You define us by our end, but you have forgotten what happens when a mortal stops fearing that end." The Grand Priest's eyes narrowed, his serene, eternal facade violently cracking to reveal a cold, desperate fury. With his free hand, he summoned a disk of concentrated, transcendent erasure, a halo of absolute annihilation that bypassed physical matter entirely, designed to sever a soul's conceptual blueprint from the fabric of reality. He thrust the blinding construct directly into Vegeta's midsection, intending to unmake the anomaly in a single, flawless motion. The halo struck. The impact generated a shockwave of blinding, sterile light that bleached the surrounding void, forcing the crippled angels and trembling destroyers below to desperately shield their eyes. It was an executioner's blow, mathematically flawless and fundamentally absolute. Yet as the agonizing light receded, the cosmic order wept. The celestial halo had embedded itself into Vegeta's flesh, burning away his battle armor and tearing deep into his physical form. But it had not erased him. Instead, the jagged, abyssal crimson flames of his demonic Hakai surged around the angelic construct like a predator sensing a wound, violently devouring the holy light. His ultra ego, the divine technique that converted physical damage into limitless escalating strength, had mutated under the crushing weight of his absolute sorrow. It was no longer a technique of martial pride. It was an engine of metaphysical cannibalism. The divine punishment only made the demon infinitely heavier, infinitely angrier. With a guttural roar that spat blood and black lightning, Vegeta drove his knee upward, burying it deep into the Grand Priest's sternum. The sound of angelic ribs shattering echoed through the dimension like the snapping of celestial pillars. The kinetic force of the blow lifted the Grand Priest off his feet, his lungs collapsing as the breath of the cosmos was violently expelled from his chest. Vegeta followed the brutal strike instantly, releasing his grip on the crushed wrist, only to seize the Grand Priest by the throat. He drove the immortal apex down, slamming him into the indestructible Kachi steel with the momentum of a falling meteor. The arena floor, entirely impervious to the clashes of the multiverse's greatest warriors, buckled and disintegrated into a crater of raw nothingness. Down in the ruins of the spectator stance, Lord Beerus fell to his knees, the god of destruction for Universe 7, a deity who had spent eons casually reducing planets and civilizations to stardust, stared at the cataclysm above with wide, hollow eyes. The fundamental essence of destruction he had spent millions of years cultivating felt like a child's flickering candle compared to the suffocating, sun-swallowing abyss radiating from his former mortal pupil. Beside him, Whis leaned heavily upon his staff, a thin trail of luminous silver blood leaking from the corner of his mouth from the earlier shockwave. The angel's usually immaculate hair was disheveled, his calm composure completely shattered by the impossible mathematics unfolding before him. "He is not destroying," Whis choked out, his voice trembling as he watched the dark silhouette of the Saiyan prince standing over the broken body of his father. "He is punishing creation itself. We have birthed a monster that even the heavens cannot put down." The crater smoked with an energy that fundamentally defied the natural order. The Grand Priest, pinned beneath the unrelenting astronomical gravity of Vegeta's boot, coughed, a ragged, wet sound that sent a sympathetic shudder through the foundational pillars of the remaining universes. Silver blood stained his immaculate blue robes, marring the absolute perfection of his existence. His violet eyes, usually bottomless pools of tranquil infinity, were now wide with an emotion his celestial mind had never been programmed to compute. Pure, unfiltered desperation. He raised his uninjured hand, his trembling fingers tracing a rapid, complex geometry in the suffocating air. "You are in error," the Grand Priest commanded, his voice tearing at the very fabric of the void, bleeding divine authority into the vacuum. "A microscopic variable that has outgrown its bounds. I am the voice of the Omni King. I command your atoms to unbind." A grand orchestration of ancient divine magic erupted from the glowing sigil. It was the song of erasure, a frequency designed to peacefully dismantle the spiritual and physical architecture of any living being. It enveloped Vegeta in a sphere of incandescent, searing white. High above the crater, the remaining angels, Vados, Makarita, Korn, and the others, having recovered from the initial devastating shockwave, descended like falling stars. They surrounded the rim of the destroyed arena, their celestial staffs glowing with a synchronized, desperate harmony. They poured their own unfathomable ki into their progenitor's attack, amplifying its absolute power to a level that could effortlessly unmake an entire timeline. For a lingering, suspended moment, the world of Void was submerged in silence, drowned in a light so pure and overwhelming that it burned the retinas of the gods of destruction watching from the lower rubble. It was the concentrated, unified will of the angelic realm, a sterilization protocol that left no room for survival. Then, a sound broke the absolute purity. It was a low, rattling laugh that vibrated through the kachi-kachi steel. It did not sound entirely like Vegeta. It sounded like the grinding of tombstone against tombstone, the collective, phantom mockery of a warrior race long denied their rightful vengeance. "Is this the absolute limit of your song?" The voice echoed from within the blinding sphere, distorted by extreme gravity. The flawless white light began to curdle. Veins of midnight black and bleeding crimson violently fractured the perfect, luminous sphere, spreading like a necrotic plague across the angelic magic. The Hakai of the demon god was not simply resisting the erasure, it was actively consuming it. Vegeta's mutated ultra ego was digesting the divine frequency, converting the angel's desperate sterilization into pure, unadulterated malice. With an explosive roar of shattered glass that deafened the cosmos, the sphere violently imploded. The backlash of corrupted, crimson energy erupted outward in a catastrophic shockwave, sending the encircling angels hurtling backward into the abyss like discarded dolls. Their halos flickered violently, dimming like dying embers caught in the teeth of a hurricane. Vegeta stood completely untouched in the center of the devastation. The upper half of his battle armor had been vaporized by the sheer heat, revealing a physique corded with glowing, jagged scars of dark ki. His ultra ego had crossed a threshold that the gods had never even conceptualized. He reached down, burying his fingers into the collar of the Grand Priest's ruined robes, and lifted the apex entity into the air with terrifying, effortless grace. "You sing of boundaries and variables," Vegeta whispered, bringing his face mere inches from the Grand Priest's trembling gaze. His luminous silver eyes were devoid of mercy, reflecting only the abyss of his own shattered soul. "But you never understood the core of a Saiyan's strength. We do not grow in the sterile light of your perfection. We evolve in the absolute dark." The prince paused, his jaw tightening as the phantom memory of golden hair and a carefree, idiotic grin flashed across his mind. The name caught in his throat, a momentary lapse of insurmountable sorrow that fueled a fresh, catastrophic surge of crimson power. And Kakarot took all the light with him. Vegeta's free hand ignited. He did not summon a grand, sweeping wave of energy. Instead, a tiny sphere of dense, swirling black destruction materialized, hovering above his palm. It was small, no larger than a mortal heart, but it distorted the space around it, carrying the suffocating gravitational mass of a dying galaxy. The microscopic sphere of black destruction did not emit heat, nor did it cast light. It was a localized event horizon, a perfect manifestation of absolute, unforgiving end. The Grand Priest looked down at the swirling anomaly suspended over the Saiyan's palm, the violet infinity of his eyes fracturing into a mosaic of sheer, unprecedented terror. For billions of years, he had been the architect of divine law, the untouchable maestro who dictated the rhythm of the cosmos. Now he was merely flesh, caught in the jaws of a predator born from the very suffering he had orchestrated. "You do not understand the architecture of the void, mortal." The Grand Priest gasped, silver blood bubbling past his lips. His voice, once a harmonious symphony of absolute authority, was reduced to a wet, desperate wheeze. "The Omni King is not the summit. He is a seal. If you shatter this hierarchy, you invite the ancient horrors that sleep beyond the multiverse. You will doom everything." Vegeta's expression remained carved from glacial ice. The raging crimson storm of his ki violently condensed, swirling around his bruised and bleeding musculature like a suffocating second skin. The memory of Goku's ashes drifting into nothingness played on an infinite, torturous loop within his mind. The universe had already ended. Whatever came next was merely the epilogue. "There is nothing left to doom," the Prince of all Saiyans replied, his voice a low, tectonic rumble that carried the weight of 1 billion erased souls. He drove his hand forward. The dark sphere did not explode upon impact. It phased directly through the Grand Priest's ruined chestplate and embedded itself into his celestial core. What followed was not a physical detonation, but a conceptual unmaking. The blinding pure light of the Grand Priest's soul violently inverted. Jagged fissures of pitch-black energy tore outward from his center, crawling up his neck and down his limbs like venom racing through veins. The progenitor of the angels threw his head back and unleashed a sound that shattered the eardrums of the remaining deities. A scream of absolute, unimaginable agony as his immortal blueprint was violently shredded by mortal malice. The silver halos of the surrounding angels, already dim and flickering from the previous blast, suddenly shattered in unison. The metaphysical tether that bound the children to their father abruptly snapped. Whis, suspended mid-flight in a desperate attempt to intervene, was violently grounded. The elegant, untouchable mentor crashed into the ruined Kachi steel, his celestial staff rolling away as he clutched his chest. A terrifying alien sensation seized the angels. It was cold. It was heavy. It was the suffocating, paralyzing grip of true mortality. Vados wept, her flawless tears turning to ordinary water as they struck the ash-covered ground. Makarita screamed, clutching her head as the eternal quiet of her mind was flooded with the deafening roar of a universe thrown out of balance. Down in the debris, Lord Beerus did not rise to fight. The god of destruction, who had terrorized the cosmos for eons, simply bowed his head, his golden eyes hollowed by a despair so profound it paralyzed his very soul. The Hakai energy within his own body violently recoiled, utterly submitting to the apex predator standing upon the altar of a murdered god. The divine hierarchy had not just been defeated, it had been butchered. Vegeta released his grip. The hollow, blackened husk of the Grand Priest crumbled into a pile of silent, lifeless ash, drifting away into the weeping void, a twisted mirror of Goku's own demise. The Saiyan turned his gaze upward, his luminous silver eyes locking onto the floating thrones. The twin Zenos, the undisputed kings of all creation, were trembling. But before the demon god could ascend to claim his final vengeance, the temperature of the null realm instantly plummeted to absolute zero. A shadow, vastly darker and older than Vegeta's rage, began to bleed through the fabric of the dimension above the Omni Kings. It was a presence so heavy, so fundamentally ancient, that it made the dying remnants of the universe feel like a fleeting breath. The seal had been broken. The null realm did not simply freeze. It forgot the concept of warmth. The swirling, apocalyptic crimson of Vegeta's demonic Hakai, which had violently dominated the dimension only seconds before, was suddenly compressed, pushed back against his skin by an invisible, omnipresent weight. High above the shattered Kachi steel, the twin Zenos, the undisputed, apathetic rulers of the multiverse, shrank back into their floating thrones. The terrifying hollow voids of their eyes widened, not with anger, but with the primal, unadulterated terror of disobedient children watching the door latch slowly turn. They clutched each other, their mechanical apathy completely shattered, whimpering as the fabric of the dimension above them tore open. It was not a being of flesh, nor of divine light. It was an intrusion of primordial darkness, a silhouette that predated the very concept of universes. This was the progenitor, the ancient slumbering architect who had created the Omni Kings as mere proxies, a cosmic failsafe hidden behind the Grand Priest's angelic seal. Now, with the seal reduced to weeping ash, the father of erasure stepped into the light. The entity had no discernible face, only a vast, shifting expanse of starry oblivion that seemed to absorb the trembling remnants of reality. When the progenitor spoke, there was no sound. The voice manifested as a localized earthquake within the minds of every surviving entity. It was an absolute mandate, a frequency of cosmic law that bypassed hearing and struck directly at the soul. The tapestry is stained with the arrogance of dust. The gods of destruction, already paralyzed by despair, were forced flat against the ruined ground by the mere echo of the entity's thought. Beerus gasped for air that no longer existed, his divine body instinctively attempting to shut down rather than endure the suffocating pressure. The fallen angels, stripped of their halos and bleeding mortal tears, wept in the absolute dark, unable to even gaze upon the true face of their creator's creator. The hierarchy was not just broken, it was being erased and overwritten in real time. Vegeta alone remained standing. The gravitational pressure of the ancient entity bore down upon him, a force designed to unmake anomalies by sheer ontological weight. His Kachi armor, hardened by the blood of the Grand Priest, began to hairline fracture. The muscles beneath his skin tore and restitched themselves in a frantic, agonizing cycle, as his corrupted ultra ego desperately tried to convert the conceptual crushing force into physical power. Blood ran from his nose, his eyes, and his ears, turning into frozen floating diamonds in the absolute zero of the void. "I am the prince of all Saiyans," Vegeta snarled through shattered teeth, his luminous silver eyes locking onto the infinite expanse of the progenitor. The demonic crimson fire of his aura flared, a defiant torch burning in the center of an endless ocean. "I have slaughtered your puppet kings. I have broken your angels. I will not be judged by the shadow hiding behind them." He pushed upward. Every millimeter he gained against the oppressive ancient gravity tore another muscle fiber, snapped another bone. But the Saiyan refused to kneel. He gathered the entirety of his abyssal Hakai, condensing it into his right arm until the sheer density of the energy threatened to tear his own arm from its socket. With a deafening roar that carried the final defiant echoes of Universe 7, Vegeta launched himself toward the ancient shadow, a blinding streak of blood-red malice aimed straight at the heart of the void. The progenitor did not move. It merely observed the approaching mortal with the cold, detached curiosity of a star watching a moth. A single, unseen pulse of ancient, unadulterated erasure expanded from the shadow. It did not strike Vegeta, it simply passed through him. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The roaring abyssal flames of his demon god form were extinguished like a candle in a hurricane. His momentum died entirely. Suspended in the freezing void, Vegeta's eyes rolled back as the conceptual strike bypassed his ki, bypassed his flesh, and struck directly at the foundational blueprint of his soul, intending to unravel him thread by thread. But as the icy fingers of absolute erasure dug into the deepest, most guarded recesses of his genetic code, they struck something the gods had never accounted for. Beneath the royal lineage, beneath the history of planet Vegeta, buried in the primordial darkness of the Saiyan race's ancient origin, an ancient, dormant resonance violently snapped awake. The heartbeat of the first king began to drum. The cold of the progenitor's erasure was not a temperature. It was the ultimate absence of meaning. As Vegeta hovered paralyzed in the blackened sky, the conceptual strike began its clinical work. It peeled away the layers of his existence. First went the title of prince, dissolving into the void. Then went the memory of his pride, the agonizing sting of his failures, and the blinding, desperate love for his family. He was being unwritten from the end backward, his life story erased page by page in a silent, painless oblivion. This was how Kakarot had died. This was the quiet, terrifying piece of absolute removal. But Vegeta's soul was not a fragile tapestry meant to be unspooled. It was a jagged, hardened forge, tempered by endless gravity and the unyielding stubbornness of a warrior race. As the progenitor's erasure dug deeper, past the Hakai, past the divine ki, past the Super Saiyan ascensions, it breached the very bedrock of Vegeta's DNA. It struck the primordial marrow of the Saiyan lineage. And there, in the deepest, darkest cavern of his ancestral memory, the unmaking hit a wall of absolute, immovable bedrock. The silence of the void was suddenly broken by a sound that did not belong to Vegeta, nor to the gods. It was a heartbeat, slow, colossal, terrifyingly heavy. It reverberated, not through the shattered Kachi steel, but through the metaphysical fabric of time itself. In the microscopic fraction of a second before his final atom was erased, Vegeta's consciousness was violently yanked inward. He did not see the blank face of the progenitor, nor the weeping angels. He saw a sky of burning crimson, a prehistoric planet tearing itself apart under the weight of its own raw, unrefined gravity. Standing at the epicenter of this primordial storm was a silhouette. A towering, magnificent shadow draped in pelts and archaic armor, radiating an aura that felt like the birth of a newborn star. This was not a god. This was the first king, the original apex predator of the cosmos, whose very existence was a rebellion against the stagnation of the divine. "You have forgotten what we are," a voice echoed within Vegeta's mind. It was a voice of gravel and thunder, a chorus of millions of primal roars harmonizing into a single, undeniable truth. We were not born to serve the balance. We were born to break it when the scales grew rusted. The erasure attempting to unweave Vegeta suddenly violently stalled. The progenitor, the ancient shadow looming over the null realm, paused. For the first time since it had stepped from the abyss, the entity registered a flaw in its absolute mandate. The mortal was not disappearing. Instead, the microscopic speck of Vegeta's remaining existence began to pull the erased fragments of his soul back from the oblivion. It was an impossible regression of cause and effect. The frozen diamonds of his blood liquefied and slammed back into his veins. His shattered armor reformed, the jagged lines fusing together with a blinding, incandescent heat. The absolute zero of the dimension was instantly incinerated by a sudden localized inferno that tasted of ancient stardust and spilled blood. From the depths of Vegeta's chest, a new light ignited. It was not the calm, ethereal blue of the gods, nor the abyssal crimson of his demonic Hakai. It was gold. But it was not the bright, hopeful gold of his first ascension on Namek. This was an archaic, heavy, molten gold, the color of a dying sun refusing to collapse. The ultimate golden ultra-ego was clawing its way into existence, fusing the unyielding, damage-absorbing madness of his personal power with the forgotten ancestral supremacy of the first Saiyan who ever defied the heavens. Vegeta's eyes snapped open. The luminous silver had been swallowed by a predatory, glowing amber. With pupils slitted like a sovereign beast, he breathed in, and the cosmic storm raging around the progenitor was violently sucked into his lungs. The paralyzed deities below could only watch as the Prince of Universe 7 stopped being merely a prince. He was becoming a myth reborn. "My blood," Vegeta whispered, the sound overlapping perfectly with the thunderous, archaic roar of the first king, "does not belong to you." Time within the grip of the progenitor's erasure had ceased to flow, but within the cavernous depths of Vegeta's soul, eons were passing in violent, agonizing succession. The icy void of the null realm vanished, replaced by the crushing, blood-red atmosphere of a prehistoric world. The gravity here was not a mathematical constant. It was a living, breathing entity that sought to grind the unworthy down into the bedrock. Standing amidst the tempest of this primordial landscape was the first king. He was not a god born of pristine light, but a titan forged in the crucible of absolute survival. His mane of hair was as dark as the space between stars, and his eyes held the savage, unyielding fire of a race that had refused to die. "You wear the stolen robes of destruction, little prince," the first king's voice boomed, a sound that cracked the tectonic plates beneath Vegeta's ethereal feet. Hakai is a crutch. It is the sterile, detached tool of the very deities who exterminated your bloodline. To wield it is to admit their supremacy. The first king did not wait for an answer. He moved with a speed that made the angel's ultra instinct look like a sluggish mathematical equation. A fist, wrapped in archaic, rusted gauntlets, buried itself into Vegeta's gut. The impact did not just break ribs. It shattered the metaphysical foundation of his demonic form. The abyssal crimson of Vegeta's corrupted Hakai violently bled out of him, forcefully expelled by the sheer blunt trauma of the ancient strike. Vegeta was thrown across the desolate plains, crashing through mountains of jagged obsidian. The pain was beyond mortal comprehension. This was not a physical beating. This was a hellish, spiritual vivisection. The first king was stripping away every divine blessing, every angelic technique, and every godly concession Vegeta had ever absorbed, leaving only the raw, exposed nerve of his Saiyan essence. "They taught you to empty your mind." The giant approached, his footsteps causing the very sky to bleed fire. "They taught you to detach, to balance, to govern. Cowardice. A Saiyan does not empty himself. He consumes the fire. He becomes the weight of his own suffering and weaponizes the burden. Vegeta dragged himself from the rubble, his celestial armor gone, leaving only the torn remnants of his pride. His demonic power had been ripped away, leaving him hollow, vulnerable, and agonizingly mortal. The first king raised a colossal foot, preparing to crush the prince's skull and end the lineage once and for all. But Vegeta did not cower. As the shadow of the ancient titan fell over him, a feral, blood-soaked grin stretched across Vegeta's battered face. The hollow emptiness left by the eradicated Hakai was suddenly filled by an explosive, volcanic eruption of pure, unadulterated will. He reached up, his bare hands catching the descending foot of the first king. The ground beneath them instantly vaporized from the kinetic friction. "I am no one's puppet," Vegeta snarled, his voice harmonizing with the primordial storm. "Not the gods, not yours." He pushed upward, throwing the Titan off balance. The molten heavy gold that had sparked deep within his DNA now erupted from his core like a dying star going supernova. This was the ultimate golden ultra ego. It did not rely on the cosmic laws of destruction. It relied on absolute, undeniable dominance. It was the conceptual embodiment of an unyielding spirit that grew infinitely heavier, infinitely sharper, with every ounce of damage, every drop of blood, and every broken limit. The first king watched the blinding heavy gold consume the prince, and for the first time, the ancient phantom smiled. It was a terrifying, proud expression. "Then take the crown, my blood," the titan whispered, dissolving into the fiery wind, "and show the heavens the true weight of our race." The mental crucible collapsed in a fraction of a microsecond. In the absolute zero of the null realm, the progenitor's unseen, erasing grasp was suddenly, violently shattered. The frozen stardust surrounding Vegeta incinerated into nothingness. An aura of liquid, blinding gold erupted into the void, its density so astronomically high that it generated its own crushing gravitational field, pulling the shattered fragments of the arena into orbit around him. The ultimate golden ultra ego had manifested in the physical world, its ambient heat burning away the ancient shadows, and its mere presence caused the progenitor to violently recoil. The void of the null realm did not merely witness the birth of a new power, it was physically crushed beneath it. The blinding molten gold of Vegeta's ultimate ultra ego did not radiate outward like the gentle, expansive light of the gods. It collapsed inward, an impossibly dense gravitational singularity of pure, weaponized will. The shattered fragments of the Kachi Kachi arena, the floating debris of broken platforms, and even the ambient, lingering light of the angelic realm were violently pulled into his orbit, disintegrating into subatomic ash before they could even touch his skin. The progenitor, the ancient shadow that predated time itself, registered a terrifying, impossible anomaly. The absolute cold of its conceptual erasure was boiling away. For the first time in the infinite history of the multiverse, the architect of oblivion was forced to retreat. The colossal expanse of starry darkness violently contracted, attempting to distance itself from the suffocating, heavy heat radiating from the mortal. But Vegeta was no longer governed by the limitations of space or speed. He did not fly. He simply dictated that the distance between himself and the ancient entity no longer existed. In a single, violent distortion of reality, Vegeta materialized directly before the shifting, faceless expanse of the progenitor. He did not summon a grand blast of ki. He did not utter a triumphant roar. He merely drew back his right arm, the archaic heavy gold of his aura condensing entirely into his knuckles, and drove his fist directly into the center of the primordial shadow. The impact did not create a sound. It created a conceptual vacuum. The absolute strike of the first king, reborn in the flesh of the final prince, carried the collective, agonizing weight of every mortal soul ever subjected to the whims of divine apathy. It struck the progenitor not as physical trauma, but as an undeniable, ontological rejection. The ancient shadow violently shuddered. Fissures of blinding molten gold spiderwebbed across its infinite expanse, tearing the fabric of the dark entity from the inside out. With a final silent scream that ruptured the eardrums of the paralyzed gods of destruction below, the progenitor of erasure shattered like a fragile pane of glass, dissolving into a rain of harmless, dying sparks. The ancient failsafe was broken. The path to the throne was completely unobstructed. Vegeta turned slowly, his slitted amber eyes locked onto the twin Zenos, the Omni Kings, the absolute sovereigns who had casually wiped trillions of lives from existence with a giggle, were no longer laughing. They sat huddled together on their floating thrones, their mechanical apathy completely replaced by the paralyzing, primal terror of prey caught in the open. The tournament. Vegeta's voice resonated, a low tectonic grind that echoed with the absolute authority of his ancestors, is concluded. He raised a single, gauntleted hand. He did not aim to erase them. Erasure was a coward's tool. He simply exerted the absolute, crushing gravity of his golden key upon their celestial platform. The invincible, divine architecture of the Omni King's throne violently buckled, groaning under the weight of an entire race's vengeance, before completely imploding. The Zeniths were sent tumbling into the absolute dark, their childish crowns tumbling from their heads, their absolute authority fundamentally crushed by a mortal hand. The multiverse violently shuddered as its kings were dethroned. But the cosmos is a breathing, reactive organism, and the violent severing of its apex predators triggered a catastrophic, final immune response. The very fabric of the null realm began to weep, bleeding a luminescent, blinding white light that carried no serenity, only pure, unfiltered madness. From the tears in the dimension, a new entity manifested. It was the Mother of Angels, the hidden, divine matriarch who wove the halos and dictated the flow of celestial grace. But she was not descending in peace. Witnessing the butchery of her children, the death of her husband, and the dethroning of her masters, the Mother of Angels had gone utterly, catastrophically mad. Her aura was a frantic, hyper-accelerated tempest of angelic light that sought to forcefully stitch the broken universe back together by sealing the anomaly at its core. She screamed, a sound of pure maternal grief that forced even Vegeta to brace himself against the sonic shockwave. Countless burning halos erupted from the void, violently wrapping around Vegeta's limbs, his neck, and his torso, attempting to forcibly sever his connection to his own ki and seal his golden fire away forever. The burning halos of the Mother of Angels constricted around Vegeta's limbs with the absolute unyielding force of cosmic law. These were not the gentle guiding rings of her children. These were the heavy suffocating chains of divine quarantine. The blinding white light seared into the prince's flesh, attempting to forcefully sever the meridian pathways of his ki and plunge his soul back into the dark. The matriarch of the heavens descended, her flawless face contorted into a mask of weeping, incoherent agony. She poured the entirety of the multiverse's remaining foundational energy into the seals, desperate to crush the heavy, molten gold radiating from the anomaly that had butchered her family. For a terrifying, suspended moment, the roaring inferno of Vegeta's ultimate golden ultra-ego began to dim. The astronomical gravity he had commanded was suddenly turned inward, compressed by the frantic, absolute will of the universe's mother. The golden aura flickered, pushed back against his hardened skin as the halos tightened further, biting deep into bone. Down below, the paralyzed gods of destruction held their breath. Beerus watched with wide, hollow eyes, waiting to see if the ancient hierarchy would finally manage to suffocate the upstart flame. But the Mother of Angels, blinded by her apocalyptic grief, had made a fundamental, fatal miscalculation. She had treated Vegeta's ki as if it were divine light, a finite resource that could be smothered and sealed away by a superior conceptual container. She had forgotten the very nature of the beast she held in her chains. A low, vibrating hum began to emanate from the compressed space between Vegeta and the binding halos. It was the sound of a collapsing star violently rejecting its own death. To a Saiyan, pressure is not a prison, it is a catalyst. For his entire life, Vegeta had actively sought out the most crushing gravity, the most insurmountable odds, and the most agonizing defeats, strictly to forge his spirit against the anvil of his own limitations. By sealing his unfathomable power into an infinitely small, microscopic point within his core, the Mother of Angels had not extinguished his fire. She had unknowingly built the ultimate crucible. Vegeta slowly raised his head, his slitted amber eyes locked onto the weeping matriarch, and a terrifying, blood-soaked smile stretched across his bruised face. "You think this is a cage?" Vegeta whispered, his voice no longer a roar, but a calm, absolute certainty that caused the surrounding dimension to physically shudder. This is just gravity. The heavy molten gold did not simply reignite. It mutated. The intense, divine compression forced the primordial Saiyan ki and the remnants of his abyssal Hakai to fundamentally fuse. The blinding light of the halos violently curdled, infected by a new, impossible color. They turned from pure angelic white to a dark, oxidized gold, the color of a dead sun. Vegeta flexed his arms, and the invincible chains of divine quarantine shattered like brittle ice. The resulting shockwave did not throw the Mother of Angels backward. It simply erased her momentum, stripping away her frantic, hyper-accelerated aura in an instant. She fell to her knees upon the invisible floor of the void, her hands trembling as she stared at the shattered remnants of her ultimate magic turning to ash around the Saiyan. Her mind, already fracturing from the loss of the Grand Priest and her children, completely broke. The matriarch of the heavens curled into herself, weeping mortal tears as the fundamental laws of reality formally submitted to the Prince of Universe 7. Vegeta did not strike her down. To kill a broken, weeping god offered no pride, no evolution, and no justice. She was merely a ghost of a forgotten era, left to wander the graveyard her husband had built. He turned away, ascending the invisible, shattered steps toward the ruins of the Omni King's pavilion. The absolute silence of the Null Realm returned, but it was no longer the suffocating, apathetic silence of the Xenos. It was a heavy, respectful stillness. The surviving deities below, the Kaioshins, the Destroyers, and the fallen angels, remained pressed against the dust, physically unable to rise in the presence of the absolute apex. Vegeta stood alone at the summit of creation, his dark, golden aura burning steadily in the infinite night. The throne of the cosmos was reduced to a mountain of ash, and he had no desire to sit upon it. He looked out over the vast, empty expanse of the world of void, the memory of Kakarot's fading ashes finally settling into a quiet, enduring scar upon his soul. The gods were dead, the angels were broken, and the heavens had been dragged down to the dirt. The stars burned quietly, as if remembering his will.